Well, let's talk about now. I guess talk about the plot twist of all plot twists is that coming off of that COVID season a couple years ago, Jim Harbaugh was finally able to get this program to bust through. They're 25-3 the last 2 years, pair of Big Ten titles, pair of wins over Ohio State, pair of trips to the playoff, and still working on getting over the hump in that regard, which is what they hope they can do this year. But they've killed a lot of narratives. Jim Harbaugh's killed a lot of narratives these last 2 years, and as someone who follows all of college football, I'm looking, what's your balcony view of the job he's done over the last few seasons and what it's taken for them to get over the hump?
Well, I think it's been pretty incredible. And I think it's been, the way they've done it is pretty amazing. It was the staff turnaround, basically flipping the staff, getting younger, getting to where you have multiple future head coaches on your staff. And they're very good evaluators, clearly very good developers too. Because I don't know that Michigan's high school recruiting has really changed all that much. It wasn't like it was bad before. It was good, and you had the occasional 5-star that they were signing. It's that they are now developing those guys at a higher level than almost anybody. The Harbaugh statement that 20 guys may get drafted, that feels a little aggressive, but it doesn't feel that far off. Could they set a record with the number of guys they get drafted? Absolutely. I was talking to Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, and he said 7 draft eligible offensive linemen could be in camps this time next year, which is bonkers because obviously they also have freshmen and sophomores who can play as well. So you're talking about that many people who can play at a high level right now. And it speaks to the development that Sharon Moore's done in that position group. But they've done that everywhere. I mean, look at the secondary. I live in Gainesville. RJ Moten just came to Florida, where he's probably going to jump right in and play. He was basically Wally pipped by a bunch of really good, future NFL players. It's not like he was a bad player at Michigan. He was doing fine, but the quality of player they have now, it's just gotten better and better over these last few years. And I also think the way that they structured it, focused on beating Ohio State. Hey, if we can build a team that can beat Ohio State, we can beat almost anybody. It's not quite there probably with Georgia yet, but they're headed that way. And that's all you can really ask for. I think it's been very smart. And there was on my old show, we had a commenter, a YouTube commenter, Oh No 224, the greatest line ever about Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan is built to beat Ohio State, and Ohio State is built to hang 50 on Michigan State. And it is 100% true. And the way that they've done that, I think, has been very smart, very calculated, very deliberate. And look at where they are. We are now picking them to win the Big Ten. We are picking them to beat Ohio State. That's a lot of years of domination that they have flipped around.
Yeah, it is incredible. I did want to ask you about Georgia, too. You said not quite there with Georgia. I would agree from a talent perspective, but they do come in at number 2. It feels like both the AP and the coaches, or whoever's filling out the coaches' ballots, think they have as good of a shot to kind of knock off Georgia as anybody, or at least kind of be there right at the end in that game. But do you feel like if Michigan were to knock off Georgia this year, it would be like TCU knocking off Michigan, still quite an upset? Or how much has that talent gap closed since they played 2 years ago? Because Michigan has built, as you mentioned, over the last couple of years.
Probably not that level of upset. Not TCU knocking off Michigan. Listen, TCU had some really good players. They had 7 players drafted off that roster, and they'll have multiple other players from that team get drafted. So that was a very talented team. I don't know that people are giving TCU enough credit there in terms of the talent they had on the roster. But yeah, Michigan is going to have probably close to the same number of NFL players as Georgia. Whether they get drafted as high as those guys on the average or the median draft position, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to shake out. But I think the gap is probably very, very different than it was when they played in the Orange Bowl a couple of years ago. And I would love to see that game because they're two teams that have very similar mindsets and prepare similarly. Schematically, they're not that different. I would really enjoy watching that game right now because I do think Michigan is closer. The problem with Georgia, and this is almost everybody against Georgia, even like an Alabama against Georgia, or we saw Ohio State. Georgia just has guys they can keep running out there, and it feels like it's never-ending depth. And I did a thing on the show the other day when the number one D-line prospect in the class of 2024 committed to Missouri, and I was talking about how NIL could help narrow the gap, and it does seem to be doing that, where you see guys kind of going more spread out and not just to Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson. But it doesn't seem to be affecting Georgia at all. Like, even though this dude was considering Georgia, they still have the number one quarterback, the number one linebacker, the number one running back in the class of 2024. Like, they have not slowed down one bit. If anything, they have siphoned away the mojo of Alabama. Even though Alabama still signs number one recruiting classes, it feels like Georgia just basically gets what they want when they want it for the most part. And the other factors that are affecting everybody else in college football, including Ohio State and Alabama, aren't affecting Georgia.
The teams that have recruited at Michigan's level that have won big on the national stage, it seems like the quarterback has kind of been the difference maker. Is that kind of how
Clemson's the example there? And
Clemson's a great example.
It's Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, with a similar talent profile to what Michigan has now.
Exactly. And actually wrote about this for our preview magazine. And Michigan over the last 5 years has recruited actually at a higher level than some of those, if you look at the 5 cycles leading into some of those Clemson national championships on average. Is that how you're kind of viewing this Michigan team? We kind of know a lot about what it's going to be. It's going to come down to a couple big games there in the Big Ten East, potentially, in the playoff. But is JJ McCarthy kind of the X factor that could take them to that next level?
Yeah, that's the thing that I find really interesting. And I said this going into the Ohio State game last year, because at that point, JJ hadn't had to win them a game. He had not been relied upon because they'd just been able to grind out games on the ground and just dominate people. He had to keep them in that Ohio State game.
Right.
He kept them in it for really 2.5 quarters until the ground game did start really picking up there in the middle of the third quarter. And I think that's the part that really impresses you the most is, okay, that's in him. He's got that. They can use that and tap into that when they need to. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't feel like he's getting as many opportunities to have to do that. And so when he needs to, will he be ready? Will he be practiced enough in those situations? But I think you saw it, and you're certainly not putting the TCU loss on JJ because he turned it into a shootout when it needed to be to try to get them back into the thing. So I think that is a huge difference. And, it's one of those things where you go into last season, you've got Cade McNamara. He's won you a Big Ten title. Do you need to make a change? But then you see what JJ can do, and clearly his ceiling is higher. So absolutely, I think it makes a big difference because the Clemson comparison is good. Now the question is JJ as good as Deshaun or Trevor? And that's that's another question, but he will get a chance to show that.